ousted President Hosni Mubarak to 3 years in prison on charges of embezzling public funds. The former president looked on from a cage as the judge Wednesday also sentenced Mubarak's 2 sons to 4 years in jail on the same charges. Mubarak was ousted in a 2011 uprising deemed part of the Arab Spring that swept across the Middle East. On the streets of Cairo, Mubarak supporters protested the sentence. An Egyptian court recently barred members of Mubarak's party from taking part in future elections. Now, according to the United Nations, the world's population will increase by 34% by the middle of the century, much of that growth in Africa. Global food production needs to meet this increase. A recent study of soybeans, a major food crop and great source of protein, may help feed a hungry world. Elizabeth Lee reports from Los Angeles.
The UN predicts food production must increase by 70% to meet the needs of a wealthier and more urban world population. The World Food Prize Foundation president Kenneth Quinn calls it the greatest challenge in history.
There's going to be another 2 billion people on our planet between now and 2050. And how are we going to produce enough food for them to eat?
One solution is through science, such as a new soybean study led by Darren Drury of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. With the help of a computer model, Drury is looking for a super soybean that can be more productive and reflects more light back into space to reduce the effects of global warming while using less water.
As climate change impacts the distribution of precipitation, both the magnitude and when it happens, we're finding that agricultural systems are in some cases becoming more and more stressed.
One plant with all these traits may be hard to find in the natural world, but with data from real soybean plants, a computer can redesign a plant with all the traits through the arrangement of the leaves, their density, and angle to the sun. The next step is to take the computer's model plant and test it in the field by artificially manipulating the plant. University of Illinois professor Stephen Long explains the process. He spoke via Skype.
One of the things the modeling has predicted is that there's too much leaf area. So we're actually removing leaves as the plant's growing to get a lower leaf area. We're also artificially modifying the angle of the leaves as well to reflect what the model predicted.
If the plants in the field behave as the computer model predicted, scientists will look for lines of soybean with specific traits and crossbreed them into the computer's super soybean. Long says the computer modeling can also apply to other major crops, such as wheat and rice, to help with the expected water shortage and global food crisis. The World Food Prize Foundation's Kenneth Quinn says the demand for food and water will impact the world beyond its fields and kitchens.
The potential for conflict and wars is increased significantly. And so national security and global food security are now becoming one and the same.
He says lawmakers, farmers, and scientists need to work together to prepare for the ever-growing thirst and appetite of the future. Elizabeth Lee for VOA News, Los Angeles.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Coming up, a look at South Sudan. We'll see why some critics say it became a country rather too soon. We'll be right back.
I think that Straight Talk Africa is important to the viewers precisely because they see it like a mirror. They see themselves in the discussions that are carried out on Straight Talk Africa.
Tune in to Straight Talk Africa each week on TV, radio and internet. Join in the discussion of the issues affecting you.
Well, more than 4 million people in South Sudan are at risk of famine by the end of 2014 if fighting in the country does not end soon. U.S. officials say clashes between rebels and government forces have wrecked food markets and forced people to abandon livestock and land. Farmers should be planting their crops right now, but many who escaped fighting at home say it is still not safe to return. More than 1.3 million people have been displaced. UN officials say they need $1.8 billion in aid. Now, celebrations that marked the birth of the world's youngest nation were short-lived. The conflict between President Salva Kiir's government and the opposition, led by his former deputy, Riek Machar, has prompted a humanitarian crisis and deaths of hundreds of civilians. Now, some are wondering if the Sudan-South Sudan divorce happened rather too soon. And for more perspective, I'm joined by James Copnell, author of A Poisonous Thorn in Our Hearts, Sudan and South Sudan's Bitter and Incomplete Divorce. Mr. Copnell, welcome to Africa 54.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, you did spend quite some time in Sudan, yeah? First, just give us a sense of the background to the title of the book.
A Poisonous Thorn in Our Hearts, yes. It's a quote actually from Omar al-Bashir's uncle, the Sudanese president's uncle, and he described the South Sudanese as a poisonous thorn in the hearts of Sudan. Now, that's not something a lot of Sudanese people would agree with, but I chose that title because it reflected a reality in the period after separation, after the 2011 split, when both countries tried essentially to antagonize the other, or at least the political leadership did. So you had both countries were sponsoring rebel groups in the other country. There was economic warfare, largely around oil, and even direct clashes on the disputed border. It was a difficult first couple of years after separation for both countries, and it showed how both countries were still intertwined despite the separation.
Would you say that from a person who spent some time there, the time was really ripe for this separation, to have countries that can function separately?
I'd say yes. Look, there had been two very long north-south civil wars within Sudan in which millions of people had died. And the bottom line is 99% of South Sudanese voted for separation. The South Sudanese people wanted an independent country, and that's absolutely their right, and I think therefore it was the right decision. Now, this young country, South Sudan, has immense challenges, really, really difficult challenges. At independence, it was underdeveloped. It had faced the ravages of war for such a long period of time. It had also, of course, its generation of leaders were rebel leaders, people more used to fighting in the bush than running a country, and there have been political quarrels, and that's led to the terrible situation we see now.
Now, some would say, isn't that a basis for an argument that perhaps it wasn't time, that some of those who were going to take leadership hadn't even really gotten to a point where they can run a country, and also there's the other question of some things hadn't been clearly agreed upon on how to separate the spoils of the separation.
Well, look, let's take that one by one. Were the South Sudanese ready? Put it this way, in the 50 years or so since Sudan became independent in 1956 from the colonial powers, the South Sudanese had largely known warfare and underdevelopment and bad governance from Khartoum. Why should they not have their own go running their own country? It's not as if the governance they'd had from Khartoum was any better. Now, should things have been agreed before? Undoubtedly. So what happened in the first couple of years after separation was disputes between Khartoum and Juba over oil, over the borders, over disputed regions like Abyei, and this led to huge problems for both countries because of economic interdependence of the two states, because of the way the people still live together. So in the book, A Poisonous Thorn in Our Hearts, I talk also about a South Sudanese doctor, Garang, who fell in love with a Northern Sudanese. They got married, they had children, and then when the separation came, he was in South Sudan, she was in Sudan with the children, and they needed visas to see the members of their family. Those ties are still there, but it could have been sorted out better before independence, but that doesn't mean the South Sudanese shouldn't have the country they dreamed of.
Now, very quickly, many people get a little suspicious of a Westerner writing a book or even reporting on Africa.